Good afternoon. Is there anyone here today? It's kind of hard to tell. It's the first time I've used this system, so I'm just saying, look, that looks like there's a few people here. That's good. A bunch of people join in. Glad that you joined us this late afternoon. All right, we are going to get started here very shortly. Looks like a bunch of people are coming in now, so that's good. I will go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see me here with the slides. Still kind of learning how to use this whole cast thing, so for those of you just joining, my name is Jim Stuteville. I am a Razor's Edge consultant. I have worked with a variety of nonprofits and commercial organizations to conduct different types of consultant jobs for these clients. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the most recent contract I finished for a nonprofit. It was a nonprofit that deals with cancer advocacy and research. And I will show you an automated process that we developed over the course of about 6 weeks that greatly helped the nonprofit support patients and caregivers of this cancer. And so that's the whole focus of this presentation today. And this is the title. As it says here, it all starts with a survey. And I'll show you how this whole process works. The key for this group of folks at this nonprofit was that they had to get these surveys. These surveys were the first step in how they could develop advocacy support programs for patients and caregivers. Without that survey, they had no idea who these people were. And so that survey is the key part. As you see as we walk our way through the process, you'll see how it plays a very key role in starting this whole process. This is my name and my email address. Please feel free to take it if you would like to contact me later on about this presentation. So here's our agenda for today. Today's agenda is we're going to talk about the problem, the context of the problem itself, the requirements that I was given by the client, and then I'm going to walk you through a very detailed number of slides about how we put the solution together. And then last but not least, some things to consider going forward. And I've also included a link on the next to last slide. It's an Adobe link to a paper that I wrote that further documents this process. So that way, if you've got additional questions that perhaps we don't have time to answer today, you will be able to at least see that we provide additional information for you to consider. So this is the problem. I'll let you take a look at it. So prior to us starting this process, this organization was using individuals to do different parts of this process that I'm about to show you. And it was very manually focused. It took a lot of time. They could not keep up with the workload. And for every amount of time that they developed or they dedicated to trying to make this process work, they lost time being able to provide advocacy support to their patients and caregivers. And so this was a very important project for them. It was an important project for their board of directors who kind of really pressured them to develop this process so they could spend more time helping their patients and caregivers. So some context for you. The cancer nonprofit used a survey, like I talked about previously, as a data collection tool. It wasn't just your basic 5-question survey. There was a total of about 25 to 30 questions on the survey. And it asked a lot of information about the different variations of the cancer the patient might have been diagnosed with, when they were diagnosed, any other medical data that might be helpful, like there are biomarkers that they use to determine which version of this cancer. So they ask for those kinds of things like their biomarker data. They asked for other data about, did they feel positive or negative about their diagnosis? Did they feel like they gotten enough information? Did they have a good set of doctors or support people they could count on? So these are all the types of questions they put in this survey. It was very important for them to collect this information. The data collected from this survey provided the contact, patient diagnosis, and patient needs data to the nonprofit. It allowed them to start to build a development or advocacy program for each person and patient caregiver. And so that's how this data was so important to them. They also used this data to build a profile of patients and caregivers for long-term advocacy support, because they were counting on many of these people being able to use their resources to survive this cancer and being able to support them through their journey as they hopefully got this cancer to go into remission. And then last and not least, we've talked about the survey was really important because this starts the whole process. Without the survey, the organization didn't know that someone had been diagnosed with this type of cancer. And so that's why it's so important here. So the requirements. They wanted this done in 6 weeks. And so that was obviously kind of pretty much set the timeline that we had to accomplish. The following tasks had to be done. There had to be an advocacy welcome email sent out immediately after receipt of a survey. When I asked the nonprofit about this particular requirement, the information I got back was a lot of people will, when they first get diagnosed with a disease like this, will immediately go out there and start to research it on their own. And frequently, this organization's website was one of the first places they found. And on that website, and they might be in this website in the middle of the night because they can't sleep and they want to find out about this cancer diagnosis. And so the organization that I supported wanted to be able to have that survey on their website so that person could fill it out immediately. And as soon as they submitted that survey, an email would be immediately sent. But in the email would be a very, very, very warming, a very supportive email with videos, links to resources, links to doctors that treated the cancer, links to things that they could use from getting a second diagnosis. There was just a lot of information. And so this email was very important. 2 weeks later, a follow-up email would be sent with additional information and also checking in with the person, with the patient or caregiver. So these processes had to be automatic. And then information had to be added to constant contact, which was the email application being used for the particular email program that they're using. Again, this constant contact was an email marketing application that this organization already had and they were using when I started working with them. So that's why it was selected. And then, of course, a new constituent record had to be created at Razor's Edge with all this data from the survey. And then email actions. So, for instance, when you send the first email, an email action had to be added to this constituent record documenting that this email was sent, and same for the second email 2 weeks later. And then most important is the workflow had to be reliable, durable, and maintained with minimal employee involvement. And as many of you know that have worked with these workflows, and this is really critical here. It's got to be reliable and durable because you don't want to have to go in there constantly and keep having to work it to keep it up and running. It should work pretty much on its own with just minimal monitoring from somebody who knows what they're looking at. So these are the applications that were used in the solution. There's only one of these applications that I had any say-so in using. Question Pro is their survey tool. They were already using that. I was very well familiar with it too, though, so it was good. Zapier was the one application that I selected, and I'll talk why, but it's used, Zapier, if you haven't used it, is used to automate processes, integrate applications, and create no-code to very low-code solutions to manage data, mainly the management and movement of data. And so I picked Zapier, and I'll talk about why I picked it here shortly. Constant Contact, I've already previously mentioned, was their marketing application that they used. And then, of course, Omatic Cloud. For those of you that have been in the Razor's Edge community, many of you are probably familiar with Omatic Cloud. They have both a plugin for Razor's Edge called Import Omatic, and then they have the Omatic Cloud. We were using the Omatic Cloud version here. It's an application that really, really helps streamline the ingestion of data and integrate Razor's Edge with other applications to manage the transfer of data. It's a very, very robust application, and I'll talk about that. Razor's Edge, of course, I think everybody here understands Razor's Edge. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here. And then last, Google Sheets, very familiar. Everyone's familiar with Google Sheets, just a basically, spreadsheet editor. Okay, before I get into this real quick, because one of the things I've just really noticed here is as I share my screen with you, because I'm using a laptop, I can't see if there's any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing real quick just to see if I'm missing anything from the people that are here. And then I'll go right back to sharing here just a second. Okay, so there's some people here. That's good. Are there any questions? Let me just check the questions. And no questions yet. We will definitely have time for questions at the end, so feel free to save those to the end. All right, let me go back to my screen. Just check it in. Thank you for those of you that are here. My first thought when I first got here today was there wouldn't be anybody here and I'd be talking to my computer. So I appreciate the fact that you're here. And I'll go back to sharing. So this is the solution, the graphical representation. I'm going to walk you through each part of this process. Again, started with the Question Pro, and the data moves in two phases throughout the rest of the process, and I'll explain why. But the fact of the matter is the survey itself, like I said, 25 to 30 questions. It had a lot of information. But Constant Contact, which is a digital marketing application, as I talked about previously, only has a limited amount of information that it can retain in their contact forms. And so therefore, not all the survey data could go into Constant Contact. So only the data that was needed for Constant Contact was pulled from Question Pro through Zapier and into Constant Contact. All the other survey data, every question from the survey data went into a Google Sheet. And so that would build a separate line. And I'll talk about both of these in preceding slides. Excuse me, on the slides to come. After the data within the Constant Contact, the two emails were all set up and ready to go. Then it would flow into Razor's Edge. And then on Google Sheets to Razor's Edge, the same thing, except all this is done through the Omatic Cloud. So I had to do a couple of different things for each of these, which I'll talk you through. And then the last part of this was I set up a bi-directional connector that was already built into Omatic Cloud between Constant Contact and Razor's Edge. And so what you had here is once this process here works, this constant bi-directional exchange of information is set up. So if somebody goes into Constant Contact and actually makes a manual change to one of your constituent records that's part of this process, that would then flow back into Razor's Edge to the same constituent's record. So again, that is something that was already built in by Omatic Cloud, and I'll talk about that. So sequence of events or actions is kind of step one, like I talked about, is the survey. Now what you're seeing here, if you've ever used Zapier, these are Zapier screenshots that I took. Now I've had to redact all this data, by the way, just so you see the black boxes. These are actual screenshots from the nonprofit that I was supporting. I thoroughly documented this whole process of them before I finished my contract. And they allowed me to use these for my briefing today, but asked them I redact all the privacy information, obviously, and the information about the nonprofit itself. So these are redacted. That's why you'll see the black boxes there. But as you see, this is the Zapier contact connector for Constant Contact. The way it works is I went into Zapier, and I said, I want you to connect Question Pro to Constant Contact. And then Zapier, once you enter the credentials, now you have to have credentials, administrative credentials for all these applications. So I had one for Question Pro and I had some for Constant Contact. Once I filled out the credentials for both of these, the Zapier connector made the connection. Once the connection is made, then you go through the process of telling it what you want it to do. In this case, I said, find or create a contact in Constant Contact. Constant Contact cannot send out an email unless you have already built a contact form, which is what this is here. And so this process here was to establish that this contact form would be built with certain pieces of the survey itself, certain questions. And I'll just show you one of these. I didn't want to go into all the screenshots because it would be a whole bunch of slides, but those are all in the paper that I talked about previously. That's available for you at the end of this presentation. But this is just an example. This is from the very first question. Please provide the patient's contact information, email address. This email address automatically goes into that Constant Contact form and starts that process of building that form. The other part of this is the Google Sheets, what I talked about, and this is the same. This is a connector that was already built in Zapier. It was really easy. All I had to do is connect Question Pro to my Google Sheets, my Google account, and tell it which Google Sheet title that I wanted it to, which is what this is redacted. And once I told it that, every time a survey was submitted, all it did was create a whole new row in the survey with all the answers to the questions. And so therefore, I had a full copy of each person's survey questions and their responses in each line of that spreadsheet. And then, of course, this is the whole thing over here is the whole, you have to connect this part, new response and question pro. This is the actual initiation step for Zapier. So when I get a new response and question pro for this survey, and again, I've redacted that survey, then these other two steps take place. And so that's kind of how that whole process works. So this is the second step. So this is Constant Contact. For those of you who haven't used it, this is what it looks like when you create an email campaign in Constant Contact. So what we had here is we had an email series. Whoops, let me go back one. We had an email series. My mouse is a little sensitive. We had an email series here. And so that email series was set up to send 2 emails. The first email would be sent once a new contact was entered into the list. And the second email would be sent 2 weeks later on a 2-week timeline. There is a list for these, and so I don't have it in here, but it's the critical part is the title of that list. The title of that list had to be in the Zapier connection. So the Zapier connection knew where to take the data from Question Pro and put it into which email list. And then once a contact was fully added to that list, then the email goes out automatically. And so that's what you're seeing here. And then you see some of the data that Constant Contact tracks, this becomes very valuable because if you clicked on this link, it would show you all the emails that were sent out, when they were sent out, what time they were sent out, and whether or not they were opened, and any of the links were clicked, which was very valuable for the people. You can't really see it because I've got it that way on purpose, but this is what the email says. But you can see all the links that were in this first email and how valuable that would be for a new patient or caregiver of this particular cancer. The other part of the second step was the Google Sheet part. And again, we kind of already talked about that. It would flow into Google Sheets and build a spreadsheet. And you may say, well, why do you have to do that? Well, I can't get all the questions into Constant Contact. The data, it's not set up that way. It's not a database. It's a digital marketing application. So the only way to get all the data out of each survey was to put it into this spreadsheet. And I'll show you how this works in the next slides to how we put this into Razor's Edge, but it's fairly automatic. This is the Omatic Cloud. For those of you who haven't used it, this is right from their user's guide. And it kind of shows you how Omatic Cloud works. So you have a data source, and the data source can be a CSV file, it can be an Excel file, or it can be a connector like I talked about previously between Constant Contact and Razor's Edge. So that's the source. It goes into the Omatic Cloud pretty much either automatically through a connector, or you simply drop a CSV file into the cloud and the rest of it does its thing without much help from you. And then what happens is once it goes into the Omatic Cloud, it goes into your formula that you've established for this integration of data. And if the formula passes through, if the data passes through the formula and shows that it's clean and ready to go into Razor's Edge, it goes into a box. And I'll show you what this looks like. And again, if there's issues with the data, for instance, if there's misspellings in the data, or there's data that's incomplete, and occasionally you get some bad data through this process, and so it would be dropped out here, and for you had to go in to try to fix it, perhaps delete it and bring it in again. There wasn't too much of this, but it did happen. But the good news is you don't send any data into Razor's Edge, which in this case is the destination, without it being clean and ready to go. So therefore, all your bad data gets kicked out and comes to your attention, so you can deal with it, make changes, edit it, whatever you need to do to get it to go to the right, to get it back in here to the green side, so it's then ready to reintegrate. And this just shows the contacts. This is from the Omatic Cloud site. This is the Constant Contact. You put your information over here for the accounts you want to connect, and same for over here in Razor's Edge. And so it sets the connection up for you. You just enter the data, and it go ahead and automatically connects these two, Constant Contact and Razor's Edge. So when you follow that process that I just described for Omata Cloud, this is what you get. So this comes from a constant contact. So in this case, these two records were recently added to constant contact and emails were sent out. Once the emails were sent out, the automatic connector between constant contact and Razor's Edge through the Omata Cloud automatically dropped them into a synchronization bucket for me to review. And so again, I've redacted out all the important details here. But if you followed this whole screen across, any data from the constant contact form that I wanted to bring into Razor's Edge would be added here in all these columns. And these go out quite a ways to the right. To include an email action that goes into the actions column to say that this email was actually sent on a certain date. And so that's your first establishment of a constituent record in Razor's Edge. So the way this works, the data is good. I look through it real quickly, and all I do is hit send all. Once I hit the send all button, that data flows immediately into Razor's Edge. You don't have to check it. It just goes. Now, I would periodically spot check data through this process. I would pick one record. If I sent 10 records into Razor's Edge, I would pick one record. And after this process was complete, I'd go into Razor's Edge and double check the record just to make sure that the process was working. Over time, the more I knew that the process was working well, the less I did this, but occasionally audits and spot checks are always good. And we all know that. So the second part of this was the Google Sheets data. So the previous slide showed you the constant contact data. What you have here is the Question Pro newly diagnosed import data. And so this is the complete record of survey that I talked to you about in Google Sheets. So each line of that, I would go through and convert that to a CSV file, or you could even use Excel. This process doesn't matter, or either one works. But basically what happened was every afternoon at the end of the day, I would go through, pull the file from Question Pro, the Google Sheet file, and literally drag and drop it right here. Once you do that, this process automatically works. So you can see I just did this just recently. In this case, that's what this is a screenshot. There was 8 records that were ready for my review. These records were all good. And the key part here that is important is that I left this in here so you could see it. Because we had already established a constituent record on the previous process or slide that I just showed you through the constant contact to Razor's Edge transfer, these folks now have a Razor's Edge constituent ID number, which is what this is. This is the type of number that this nonprofit used. And so now I know that, okay, these folks are already in Razor's Edge, and let me just verify that the rest of this information is correct. And then all I got to do is just hit send all. Because these are already matches, all it's going to do is update the data in there that's not in their constituent record. It will not repeat any data that's already in the record. So once I hit the send all button, the same process I showed you before. And when you're working in the Omata Cloud, this stuff here changes as data flows back and forth. And so you get a chance to follow the process as it goes on. So it works really, really well. So that's kind of how it all worked. The other thing I did, and this is what I'm going to talk about audits, is there in Question Pro itself. Question Pro allowed you to set up. It had a Google Sheets, basically a Google Sheets connector. And so what I did is an audit trail was every survey that was submitted. I had that complete survey in a PDF form sent to an email box. Basically, not a Google Sheets, an email box. Excuse me, I used Google Gmail in this case. And so what that did was that was my backup copy of the survey. So I could go into that email box. It was an email box only used for survey responses for this survey. And so if Question Pro said I'd had 45 responses, I would be able to go in the email box and see all 45 responses. Each email contained a PDF of the respondents' complete answers from the survey. I didn't look at that very often, but when I needed to audit the workflow, that's where I went to get the ground truth in terms of numbers. And so why don't I talk about this? Well, the workflow must be monitored every day, even though things work automatically, right? They submit a survey in Question Pro. It flows into Constant Contact in Google Sheets, like I've previously discussed. And then from there, Constant Contact flows into Razor's Edge via the Omata Cloud. The Google Sheet is ready to integrate through the Omata Cloud by dropping that CSV file. It goes into Razor's Edge. So there's a lot of automatic workflow that really saves you a lot of time, but you still have to go through it because there are things that will occasionally come up. And I'll tell you a good example. I found that even though we had the Zapier connection set up for Constant Contact to take the data from the Question Pro survey and create or a new contact form, or if the person was already in Constant Contact, to update their form and put them on this list, I found that maybe about 10% of those people coming from Question Pro to Constant Contact who already had a Constant Contact form in our database for Constant Contact, sometimes they didn't get added to the list. So because I was able to audit the number of people, and we didn't get, maybe the most we ever got in responses might be 10 a day. So it wasn't too hard to do the audits. I would just have to manually add them to the list, and then the rest of the process would work fine. And so I have all that documented in the paper to much greater detail how I did that. But you have to be able to go back and audit the workflow. You have to monitor it, make sure it's working. There occasionally will have little hiccups that you had to fix. The other part of this, and it's funny, since I stopped, my contract was up for this particular project for the nonprofit at the end of March. I got a call 2 weeks ago, I think, from the nonprofit and said, hey, we have a slight problem with the workflow. And the first thing I asked them was, has somebody changed something in the workflow? It can be the smallest thing. And I'll give you an example. If you change the title of the list in Constant Contact, if you change the title by one syllable, one word, it will completely break that part of the process, because the Zapier connection is taking the data from Question Pro and looking for that list in Constant Contact to put that data into. If you change the title of that list, it can't find it, the data can't go, and that stops that part of the process. So I make that very clear, and you'll see that in my paper. I emphasize that you can't not change anything. Everybody who's working with this workflow must know that this has to be the case. And that's why coordination and communication with all the parties is really, really important. The other part of this is, because I'm a consultant and I was just doing this as a contract job, once I'm complete, I had to give them a complete documentation. And you'll see in the paper, it's very detailed, because I'm not going to be working for them full time. So they have to be able to solve some of these problems, and they have to be able to communicate and coordinate with each other. So that documentation, and again, is very important, which I say here. And so I did that, like I say, pretty in depth. And the last but not least, the most important thing here is you have to continue to refine the workflow as improvements are recommended. One of the things is, previous to today's presentation, I did kind of a dress rehearsal of this briefing to one of my colleagues and one of my new clients. And one of the questions he asked me was, he said, why did you use Zapier, for instance? Well, my first thing is, I'm not a coder. I've, toyed around with a little bit of JSON, probably as many of us have, but I'm not a coder by any stretch of the means. And so I told him, I said, if I had more time than 6 weeks, I'm sure a coder using API calls and things like that could have done this a little bit more seamlessly and perhaps a little bit easier. But I only had 6 weeks, and I had to use the tools that worked. And so that's why the Zapier worked so well for me. Zapier already had a connection between Question Pro and Constant Contact and Google Sheets. So it was already set up. It was really, really pretty easy to use. So if you haven't used Zapier, you can get a free account, by the way, just to get started. It's worth taking a look at it. But so as I told him, I said, you may find better ways to do this workflow as you get better tools or as we go along, but you have to continue to refine it, and that's kind of a critical part to me. All right, so I've gotten to the part where I want to take questions, so I'm going to stop the sharing here. Okay, so you were required to use certain tools. Are there any changes you would make? Let's see. If you had full control over the tools and apps. No, I don't think so. Luckily I had a little bit of time with this nonprofit before we really got heavily into this, and I was pretty well familiar with the tools they had. And so were they. I think that's most important, is the nonprofit's personnel knew those tools, and so they were comfortable with those tools, especially Constant Contact. And so, MailChimp has a better connector with the Omatic Cloud than perhaps Constant Contact does. But Constant Contact was working for them, so there wasn't really too much choice that I had in that process. Question from Noah: do you have any advice on trying to match records across multiple programs, platforms based on donor client provided data? Yeah, that's always a constant challenge. The one thing I like about Omatic Cloud is, and that's why, I realize it's expensive for some organizations can't afford it. But the one thing about Omatic Cloud is when you build the formulas, and the formula is like a data mapping process, right? If you're going to take data from a CSV file and bring it into Razor's Edge, the formula basically tells you, okay, take the first name and place it here in Razor's Edge, take the last name, take the middle initial, take the email address. It tells you how to map the data. But one of the things it allows you to do is it allows you to do transformations of that data. For instance, if the date range that you're given to in a data source, the date range is not what you use in Razor's Edge, you can do a transformation to change that date, not date range, that date format to match up what you use in Razor's Edge. You can add data to, you can add certain types of words to data if you want it to go into Razor's Edge in a proper way. You can capitalize certain letters. You can also not capitalize certain letters. There's a lot of different transformations. For instance, if you have data, like one of the surveys, the answers to the questions were a list of potential answers, and rather than having each of those have a column within the Google Sheets, the Omatic Cloud allowed us to take all those answers and put them under one it's a process called concatenation, which allows you to use multiple answers to one question and to map that data into Razor's Edge. So all Razor's Edge saw was the one answer that the people provided and put it into the right spot. And so those are just, the other thing is we worked really hard with the survey team that put the survey together and helped shape the types of questions they ask, right? And so one of the things is if you ask the person to provide you certain types of contact information and you make that data required to filling out the survey, like for instance, first name, last name, email address, mailing address, phone number, that's 5 or 6 data points that you can use to match data to go into Razor's Edge, right? So that makes your matching a lot easier. I've found if you have a good first name, a good last name, a good email address, you're 99% sure that you can avoid duplicates because it's hard to duplicate all 3 of those. That doesn't happen very often unless people share the same email. So, do I have any recommendations on how to plan this process, Shelley? I would tell you that one of the things we did early on was I sat down with the advocacy manager, the lady who was kind of in charge of this whole process. And I said, just brainstorm with me and tell me what your vision is, right? I said, tell me how you would like this to work. Don't think about any restrictions, any limitations due to the software. Just think about how you'd make this work if you, were king for queen for a day. And that's what she did. She told me, she goes, hey, I want this thing to happen automatically. I want it to happen so that it gives people a positive image of our organization and they feel comfortable in sharing this information with us. And so she walked me through the whole process and I took a lot of notes. And then as I started drafting this up, I kind of put it on a whiteboard, in this case on my laptop whiteboard, but same thing as I started saying, okay, what do we want to accomplish? And I tried to keep it big picture. And then I actually drew a couple of diagrams. In fact, the diagram I use in this presentation is kind of one of the first things I did it by hand. That's obviously a very cleaned up version, what you saw in here. And then I said, okay, how do I do this, right? So then I said, okay, the survey. Can the survey automatically go somewhere? Yes, Question Pro could do that. Okay, if it does automatically go somewhere, where does it need to go so that I get it into Razor's Edge and get it into something that we can send an email from? Well, okay, Constant Contact and Question Pro can be connected through Zapier. Okay, that's the first. That was one of the first important pieces I solved was how to connect Question Pro with Constant Contact. I knew I could connect Question Pro with Google Sheets. They had a connector. Zapier had a connector. That was pretty easy, but the Question Pro to Constant Contact was really, really difficult. That was the first thing I had to solve. It took quite a bit of Google searching to find Zapier, and Zapier had a connector built in. And then from there, I knew Omatic Cloud could handle anything into Razor's Edge because Omatic Cloud can take any kind of data as long as they be put in a CSV file. It can go into Razor's Edge through the Omatic Cloud's formulas. But then finding that they had a Constant Contact and a connector with Razor's Edge, that was really, really good. So there are a lot of piece parts in there, and you're right. You do have to kind of plot it out and carefully out. Just, as a background, I'm a certified project manager and have my project manager certification. So this kind of stuff interests me anyway. And I do a little bit of project management consulting. In fact, I'm doing some of that now for another client. And so for me, this was a kind of a project that I really got into, because I can set it up and run it like a project. Let's see if there's any questions. I think I've answered all the questions. If there's any other things you got to, by the way, let me just show you real quick. Let me go back to my slides. Oh, wait a minute. I'll make sure. I think I've got them all. Okay, so just question from Noah, just to make sure I'm understanding, is the end-to-end flow completely automatic, or does it, let's see, does it require approvals? So good question. It is not, well, let me put it this way. You could make it completely automatic. Omatic Cloud has the permissions available for you to make it fully automatic. So that, well, there's one step you couldn't. You still have to drag the Google Sheets CSV file to the Omatic Cloud and drop it like I showed you. That's the one piece that's not automatic. But the constant contact to Razor's Edge piece could be fully automatic. I didn't set it up that way because I preferred to look at the data myself, because I found that if I looked at it, if there was any problems, I could review and fix them. But you could set it up for be fully automatic, and any data that had a problem would be kicked out, and you'd still have to go in and review the kicked out data periodically and clean it up and put it back in. But yes, it could be that could be that part of the connector from constant contact to Razor's Edge through the Omatic Cloud could be fully automatic. You still have to drop the CSV file for Google Sheets, but again, that's just dropping the file, and then everything else runs itself. And that could be automatic. Once you drop the CSV file, you don't actually have to do the review. You could just tell it to go right into Razor's Edge. The good data would go into Razor's Edge, and only the bad data would be kicked out for you to review. So that part could also be automatic. The Zapier connections were fully automatic. I didn't have to do anything. Once the survey is submitted, the data flowed two directions, one to Constant Contact and one to Google Sheets, and I had nothing to worry about there. It worked almost flawlessly. The only issues, as I previously talked to you about, was occasionally somebody didn't get added to the right list in Constant Contact, and so I'd have to go through periodically and do audits. But that part worked really, really well. Again, the only issue that the nonprofit had after I left was somebody changed the title in the list, and they had to go back and fix it. But they got it fixed, and it's back running again last time I talked to them. So let me just show you one other thing on the slides, because I want to show you the link to the paper. Let me just go back here to my screen real quick, and let's just share it one more time. All right, so these are questions. So if you go to the next, let me go to the next slide. Please copy this document, take a screenshot of it. This is the Adobe document that I put together. It's got a lot more detail than I could give you in this presentation, because again, I can write as much as I want. You either read it or you don't. But in this case, I was limited by time. So please take this. Also, feel free to contact me. You have my email in there. If you work for an organization that wants some help doing this, again, I'm a consultant, so I'd be glad to help. But I really this was a lot of fun, this whole process. I enjoyed the heck out of this project, and I'm really glad it worked the way it did. I wasn't sure when we started that it would be fully automatic or close to fully automatic, but I was just amazed at how it worked in the end. And again, I just had good tools to work with. I'm not a coder. I'm not an IT genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I was able to figure out how to make it all work. And that part gave me a lot of good satisfaction. Hopefully everybody's got this. Good. If you can still see it there, if you need it. Any other questions? I'm just trying to see if there's any. I see there's just 15 people here at one point in time. So hopefully those of you who didn't ask questions found this presentation useful. I don't know if they provide feedback, but if you do have feedback from me or you got additional questions or anything, please feel free to contact me on email. I will stay on here until we're done just to see if there's any other questions. But again, thank you very much for showing up. When you go through this process, you always ask yourself the question, what if I just talk to the computer and nobody shows up? But I appreciate those of you that were here today. It gave me at least a sense of mind that I had somebody listening. So hopefully I didn't bore you. Thank you very much. Can I paste the link to the chat? I can. Let me just go grab it real quick. That was probably a wise idea. I should have done that in the first place. There you go. I don't see any additional questions. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your time here at Blackbaud Development Days. And again, feel free to contact me via my email. I'll be glad to help you in any way you can. Like I say, we can all learn and do things better, and that's what we're here for. So thank you all, and have a good afternoon. I'll stay on here if anybody else has any questions.